We're coming off of NBA All-Star night. I'm so used to saying weekend, but we're coming off of NBA All-Star. Your boy Steph Curry had the shot going. He won the three-point contest, almost got MVP of the game for Team LeBron. What did you think of Steph's performance overall on that night?
I thought his performance on that night was very indicative of who Steph has shown he is this entire season. Starting off this season, there were so many questions about, Steph doesn't get the easy shots he used to get. He don't have all those guys out there with him anymore. And he can't do it. And, he's responded to all of those critics in a major way. I think the thing that bothers me most is people questioning his legacy at the beginning of this season. One season doesn't make a legacy, nor does one game make a legacy. And we see that a lot of times when you start talking about the greats like Steph, LeBron James, of people trying to hang their legacy off, on one season or one game. And I think it's the most ridiculous thing ever. It goes to show how few legacies there truly are and why people don't understand what a legacy really is. And so the way he showed up and showed out on Sunday night at All-Star Sunday in Atlanta, winning the three-point contest in the fashion that he did, going out there and kind of jump-starting, the All-Star game, getting the energy in there. That's who Steph is, though. He brings the energy to the gym. And so I thought it was amazing. And like I said, it was very indicative of what Steph Curry is showing and saying to the world this year.
All right, so a little bit of momentum heading into the second half of the season. Now the Warriors half a game out of a playoff spot. How confident are you that you will be able to make the playoffs when it's all said and done?
Very confident. I know what the ceiling of this team is. Very young team, but we continue to grow. I think this team has shown at times that we're much better than 19 and 18. And there's been several games now where I think we've kind of let get away from us. And that's usually the indication of a young, inexperienced team. Now you coming out of the second half, rookies are no longer allowed to be rookies. So, we have a stud in James Wiseman where, you can get those rookie mistakes in the first half and everybody's like, oh, okay. Not so much in the second half. It's time to turn it up and make that playoff push and continue to get better and understand what it's going to take to win in the playoffs once you reach the playoffs. And so I think, this team is nowhere near the ceiling of what this team could end up being. And I'm looking forward to coming out of this break rolling and continuing to grow with the guys.
And you talk about the West because it is stacked. I mean, the Utah Jazz with the best record. Phoenix has snuck their way to number 2. You've got the 2 LA teams, too. And then you still got Denver, who got a lot of experience last year in the bubble. The West is loaded again this season. Which team do you really think is the team to beat right now out there?
Well, the team to beat is the Los Angeles Lakers. They're defending champions. I know, we live in this, social media day and age where, a team lose 2 or 3 games in a row and we want to write them off. That's the topic of discussion. Can they do it again? They're the team to beat, and they will be the team. I don't, no disrespect to Utah, but they can win 40 games in a row. You're not the team to beat until you're the champion. And the Lakers are the defending champion. That's no disrespect to, like I said, Utah. That's no disrespect to Brooklyn or whoever else. I think there are a lot of good teams, very good teams, including those 2 teams I just named. But the Lakers are the defending champions, so they're the team to beat until someone can dethrone them.
Well, let's talk about Brooklyn because they are the hot team in the East, and our very own Max Kellerman said the Big Three are the greatest offense in the history of basketball. What's your reaction to that?
Draymond felt like KD was out the door. And as a result of him being out the door, Draymond was frustrated. Like, wait a minute, we 2-time champions here. We wanted you here. We've embraced you. And you on the court, but you got 1 foot out the door. You're about to leave us. And Draymond was a bit put off by that. KD's attitude is, I'm here giving you all I got to give. What you worried about what I'm going to do with my future? I'm here now. I helped us deliver 2 back-to-back titles. We about to win a 3rd because, as they said on the podcast, if KD doesn't have hurt, like Draymond said, I think it would have been a 3rd. We would have 3-peated had you not gotten hurt. And KD's response was easily. And I absolutely concur.
Of course.
It'd have been easily. It'd have swept Toronto, in my humble opinion. Having said all of that, that's really what it was about, because at the end of the day, you know, what it comes down to is that you have players who feel it should have been left to the players. And it was ruined by how the organization elected to handle it. My problem, and I loved, again, the interview was fantastic. I'm proud of Draymond, who's got a future in this business. And I've told KD on many occasions, because Draymond is a brilliant basketball player. And I don't know if anybody realizes this. Draymond's a Hall of Famer, just so y'all know. He's a 3-time champion. Yeah. He has something to do with them going to 5 straight NBA Finals. If Dennis Rodman is in the Hall of Fame,
he revolutionized the game with Steph Curry.
Yeah.
He was the pick and roll partner.
Draymond is a Hall of Famer, so let's be clear about that.
Center.
But also with KD, I've often told them both, but especially KD, anytime KD's talking basketball to us, y'all, it's a treat, because he's gonna be honest and he knows what the hell he's talking about. And so that education you appreciate, but in the end, there's also other things that we got to peel from it. For example, KD admitted on the podcast, I was a different dude once I got to Golden State. I got there, I was in it, I was focused, I was in a place that's better than any place that I've ever been. He wasn't talking about Golden State, talking about his mindset, where he was mentally. He was basically admitting that wasn't him at Oklahoma City. And there were some people who gave Russell Westbrook heat because it couldn't work out in Oklahoma City. And whether knowingly or unknowingly, KD, if you listen to him, was essentially expressing, I elevated to a different place once I arrived at Golden State. And I was doing things differently. I wasn't focused and paying attention to the kind of things that I used to pay attention to before then, which is obviously when he was in Oklahoma City. And that basically really absolves Russell Westbrook of a lot of blame that came in his direction once KD elected to walk out the door. So I think that's important to remember as well.
That's a great point. Obviously, he evolved. Max, back to this was the actual question I wanted to get to, and thank you, Stephen A., for explaining that, because I was curious. They didn't touch on it in the interview. Max, what impact, though, should Draymond's comments have on his relationship with his current team? Because he basically dogged them, and he's still on the Warriors.
Yeah, it's a great question, because that was the kind of interview, as I said, that you see Shaq and Penny sit down 20 years after they play. They've been retired for at least 10 years. Then you have that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Not about the front office and coach while you're still on the team, while one of you is still on the team. And yet, what should it do to the relationship? What it should do, if Steve Kerr and Bob Myers are smart, and they are, is strengthen the relationship. This should make things better. And it's not entirely unlike the situation with Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, although obviously much less acrimonious and Gutekunst. Here's the thing. If Kerr and Myers could take their egos out of it, then what's happening there in the conversation between Draymond and KD could be very instructive. It can help them get better. Now, Stephen A., earlier in the show, I said that's the one false note for me, was that the two of them are in the room together, KD said flatly, that's not why I left. It's the way they handled it. To me, that's a little bit evasive in terms of taking responsibility. Like, as you said, KD was, as Draymond said, he got the feeling after year 2, KD was out the door anyway. Well, that came before the way the organization handled it, right? That skirts that issue a little bit and puts the onus too much on the front office and the coach. However, as I said, if you're a student of life, and you ought to be, it is instructive to watch other students of life who've lived a lot of life. KD, when he was in Oklahoma City, Stephen A., as you point out, he was 19 years old with 1 year of college, dealing with worldwide pressure and press and focus and all this stuff. And he had otherworldly talent, and he matured over time. We watched the maturation of a young man become a fully grown man and a mature, fleshed-out human being. And he's learned a lot, and he's willing to talk about it. You know, and so one of the things that the front office and the coach and Steve Kerr should pay attention to is, hey, these are two highly intelligent players, two generational kind of players who had enormous impact on the game and our franchise, and they're giving us the details, the blueprint. Look, this is how we could have done things better. So an immature franchise, an unintelligent franchise, a franchise driven by too much ego, it'll be a problem. The Warriors have a chance, however, to take the information in that interview and make the organization better.
Or you could put it that way, Max. Let me give you food for thought because we have to go to commercial. And we're going to come back and talk about this, Molly and Max. I want you to food for thought. Just sit on this for the next 3 or 4 minutes during the commercial break. I just got a text. I got a text from an extremely well-connected individual. He doesn't work for the Warriors organization. He's very, very familiar with a lot that goes on there. Right? And that's all the information I'm going to give in regards to that because I don't want them to know who this is. It's a source. Quote, let me make sure I have this here, Max. I'm going to love to see how the Warriors are going to handle this. Part of the problem, I don't know of any African Americans they have in any executive positions that could have brought these two brothers together. Folks have complained about this several times, and this was one time where it actually showed. KD never got past this, not until the Olympic experience this year. That is the real. That's what somebody said. I don't know when he was talking about African-American executives, whether he was talking about the Warriors organization specifically or in general as a whole, the paucity of African-Americans in executive positions, particularly those who are empowered in such a way that they have the influence to bring the players together. But basically, they were making the implication that was non-existent within the Warriors organization. KD, there is no question that Draymond Green isn't the reason KD left Golden State. KD clearly had his eyes on bigger ventures because he came to do what he did. He won back-to-back championships, and I think after he won the second championship, he pretty much knew that he was going to leave after that third and final year. That's number one. Number two, let's give KD credit where credit is due. After the incident occurred, days upon days had passed, and they asked KD, the media, have y'all gotten past this? KD said no. No, not at all. He was very, very clear about that, to the point where even Draymond later spoke on it and felt compelled to acknowledge. When I saw how hurt he was, I was like, damn, I didn't realize I hurt him like that. And so he felt compelled to ultimately address it at some point in time. My point is, they both know that they had addressed their issues with one another, but more importantly, they had acknowledged that even after days and weeks had passed, they still hadn't gotten past it. And they had been open about the fact that they had not gotten past it. Once they finally sat down with one another a few weeks ago and taped this podcast, it makes total perfect sense to me how they could bring other people into the equation because they're saying it's a given that we ultimately had our issues and we didn't help ourselves with that incident that Draymond Green was clearly wrong about because you don't come at your teammate publicly like that. The fact that it was on the bench and you came there and you had to be restrained and calmed down by DeMarcus Cousins. That's
DeMarcus Cousins, the cool-headed one in that situation.
You think? So what I'm saying is that's what happened. So the point is they already dealt with each other. What they was doing was providing a macro perspective about what transpired that particular night and how they went and walked away feeling about everybody else because it's a foregone conclusion. It's a foregone conclusion how they felt about each other in the moment.
I appreciate the point you're making. And the bottom line for me is Draymond asked him point blank, was it the incident? And KD's first response to that, it's not so much the incident as the way it was handled, right? That is, to me, and as I said, this is one of the best interviews you will ever see. My hat's off to Draymond and KD. And KD, by the way, is a superstar in a different way now. Not only do many people believe he's the best player in the game, he's one of the most interesting athletes in the world to hear talk. He's a really interesting guy. So I understand that you're saying it's a more macro perspective, but if you're asked point blank, is that why you left? And you say it was more the way it was handled. That is, no matter how you slice it, taking the onus off the two people in the room talking and putting it on two dudes who aren't there. It's KD's decision in the end to leave.
But that's not how he felt. See, you can't applaud KD in one respect and then imply that he's saying something that he didn't say. What I mean by that is this. he feels the way he feels. If he's sitting there and he's telling you, for the camera, with the cameras rolling, the way that it was handled, from an organizational perspective, it turned me off. Let me tell you something. That's real. Because there's a lot of people that'll look at a situation and say, the way that this was handled made it worse. Like, for example, you're going to just try to gloss over it by suspending Draymond Green. Do you know how many players around the league were highly offended that the Warriors as an organization suspended Draymond Green? You know why they were offended, Max? Because two teammates going at each other the way that they did. How is that anybody else's business once the game is over? Y'all handle that. Or you make sure.
The organization thought they were on KD's side there. They thought they were placating KD.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They were placating KD. And that's where a lot of people lost respect for the Warriors organization. Fair or not, that was the thinking amongst players. I know that the players I spoke to, many players that I spoke to, they said that they had a problem with the fact that the organization didn't leave it to them to handle it. Why does that matter? Why does that matter? Because it's consistent with what Draymond was expressing. Draymond was like, y'all gonna F this up. Meaning that, this really, at the end of the day, is for me and KD to handle. I may have been wrong, but I had my reasons
so
for
all it would have
reacting the way
taken
that
from
I did.
KD, all it would have taken from KD, if that's the fact, and this is where I thought it was the one note, I don't even say a false note, a note I didn't like. All it would take from KD in that case is just go to Bob Myers, whoever, and say, hold on, don't do that to Dre. He and I need to work this out. Because clearly they were doing it for KD.
Time out. You don't know that he didn't do that.
Well,
he just
that's
told you
the case,
how he
but
felt.
that has not been reported.
I'm just saying, he just told you how he felt in the immediate moment, in the immediate aftermath of how things transpired because of the way things were handled. I know listen, I was in Toronto. You were there when KD went down finally, because in the finals. But who was walking out with him? It was Bob Myers. Who went to the hospital? It was Bob Myers. Who was crying at a press conference? It was Bob Myers. He clearly cares about the dude, had a lot of love and respect for KD. Who doesn't? If you know him, you gonna respect the hell out of him, first of all. Yeah. And he's not, and he ain't hard to love either. He's a good dude. Just because he speaks his mind doesn't mean that KD is not a dude. He's a great dude. But in the end, what he's talking about is the incident itself. And from an organizational perspective, how it was a turnoff for him as to how they handle it. He never said.
Do you think it's fair to blame Kerr on this?
Yes, I do. I don't think it should be limited to them, but I definitely think that there's some blame to go around. Some people would sit up there and say, well, you know what, this is about the players. Well, the players weren't the ones that held up Draymond Green for an hour and a half. It was Bob Myers and obviously Steve Kerr and those guys. And one of the things that I've religiously stated, Steve Kerr is a great guy. Please don't get me wrong, and I'm certainly not trying to cast any aspersions on him. But when KD departed from Golden State, one of the things you heard is that he wasn't necessarily feeling Steve Kerr. Now, that's not the reason he left or anything like that, but he wasn't feeling him. He never said anything negative about him, didn't, castigate him in any way. They just didn't have the kind of relationship that people thought that, a head coach should have with one of his superstar players. Having said all of that, you can debate whether Draymond Green needed to be suspended or not or what have you. But in the end, if you're Bob Myers and you're Steve Kerr, you're supposed to have a pulse on the team to be able to handle this in a smoother fashion than it was handled. So I certainly understood where they were coming from. What I would tell you that where I said to some degree, when Kevin Durant brought up how when the stuff he was watching The Last Dance and when Scottie Pippen refused to enter the game, you had players getting on him. With all due respect, where the hell was Steph Curry? The babyface assassin, the greatest shooter that God has ever created, the clear, absolute superstar player for this team, the face of the franchise. Where was he at in all of this? I found it very, very conspicuous that Kevin Durant and Draymond Green never mentioned his name. Not one time. Because a lot of times we see things and we have seen things that have transpired with the Golden State Warriors. And other stars for other franchises would have been called upon to handle something. We've never done that with Steph Curry. No one ever says, what about Steph Curry? You know what? Maybe it's because he's 33 and he looks 16. That's how young he looks, okay? And obviously he's got that kind of wonderful, affable, personality. It's impossible to dislike him and all of that stuff. He's loved universally and whatever. But I can also tell you that anybody that comes to the Golden State Warriors knows that he's the golden child. And so for me, there's a lot of meat on this bone. As you said, there's a lot more that I have to say. I'll pass it to Max, and then we'll go back and forth, I guess, throughout the show. But what was very, very conspicuous to me is that particularly when you're talking about how a situation was handled, to point to the coach and to point to the GM, all right? And I applaud KD and Draymond. I thought it was a great interview. I thought both were very believable, relatively candid. You know, I know both brothers. I speak to them, not all the time, but I speak to them. Got a lot of love and respect for both of them. So I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on either one of them. And I applaud and I appreciate them doing this interview. And I thought it was riveting. I thought it was a great watch. I thought Draymond did a great, great job of broaching subjects that most people wouldn't broach face-to-face with somebody that they've had an issue with. And he deserves to be applauded and KD deserves to be applauded. It's just that it jumped out of my mind, Max, just for the purposes of right now. What really was missing was I didn't hear Steph Curry's name, and he is the leader of this franchise.
Let me just say, watching that interview, I felt like we're in a new era of media. That's how significant an interview I felt it was. No one could have conducted that interview with KD like Draymond Green just did. And the fact that they're doing it while they're still active players, that's the kind of sit-down that Shaq had with Penny 20 years after they played together. They did it now. That was something. And let me say something else. If you are a student of life, and I hope you are, it is instructive, then, and you already know, you like to hear from other students of life. And that's what KD is. KD is very impressive. His journey in the NBA and his maturation and his obvious intelligence and introspection was really something to see. I didn't think there was one false note in that interview except blaming Steve Kerr. It's not that Steve Kerr and Bob Myers and everyone deserves some responsibility. I'm sure in any situation in life, you look back and you go, that wasn't handled optimally. Could have handled that one better, right? And there are things to be learned for the front office and for the coach, I am sure. And it plainly, based on the way Draymond and KD laid it out, they sounded authentic and wise. But in the end, guys, KD, it was your choice. Any team that ever existed, if you're available, KD, will open up the vault and say, go ahead, take whatever you want to do, except for the Knicks. James Dolan wanted certain provisions, apparently. But anyone else ever is like, oh, KD, sure, please stay. I'm quite sure they suspended Draymond Green because they want him. Like, look, KD, we're suspending him. You're the guy. So could they handle it better? Sure. Do they deserve some blame? Yeah. But it was a false note, Stephen A., because as direct as Draymond was with those questions, as real as both of those guys kept it, or seemed to keep it from where I was sitting, the one time, and this is human nature, you're sitting down with someone, you have respect for them, you have a relationship, and it's public, it's usually not going to get to the place where you two start butting heads and disagreeing about an old conflict. And what was it? KD's going to say, yeah, Dre, it's your fault that I left. Or, no, I'm a grown man. That's my decision, but I did not like the way that went down. To instead say, I don't like the way the organization handled it. The organization handles, look, every organization could handle certain things better or worse, but they handled things so well that KD wanted to play there. They handled things so well that had it not been for injury, they would have three-peated, four-peated, five-peated, as many peats as you want to throw in until KD got hurt, right? I mean, like, that's what it is. So that was the one note you cannot, if you're KD and Draymond in that moment, blame the coach in the front office when it was your decision to leave.